Because what you don't know about energy can kill you. Here's Alex Epstein.
Welcome to Power Hour. I'm Alex Epstein. Last week, we had on Professor Adrian Bejan of Duke to talk about the physics of energy and environmental impact. And this week, I'm having him back on to discuss the physics of freedom and issues of freedom more broadly. So if you haven't heard last week's episode, I would highly recommend listening to it or watching it first, because this week's episode will in many ways depend on that episode. Particularly at the beginning of last week's episode, I gave an introduction to Professor Bejan's ideas that I think will be helpful in orienting you, since some of the discussions get technical and sometimes abstract, although I try to keep them concrete. So if you haven't listened to last week's or watched last week's, do so now. That said, if you're impatient and you want to get directly to this one, I hope you enjoy it. It's a long interview, but I think and in part because we get through a lot of interesting topics, and there's still some more stuff I want to ask him about. As I say at the end, I want to do something in the future on academic freedom, which he has a lot of great points on in his book, Freedom and Evolution, which you can get on Amazon. But I think we covered a lot today. So hope you enjoy it, and I'll be back on the other side. I'm joined once again by Professor Adrian Bejan. Adrian, welcome back to Power Hour.
Well, I'm happy to be back. It means that after part one, I passed the grade, okay? Or I passed the audition. I'm energized to continue that discussion.
Okay, terrific. Well, let's jump right in. So today we're going to be talking about freedom in a very broad way. And I thought I would just share for a minute or two a story that for me captures what I value about freedom. And then I think you're going to have an even broader conception. But this is from the history of energy. And I don't know if you've heard this story. I haven't told it that much, but it really made an impression on me when I started studying energy about 13 years ago. And it's the story of the history of illumination via oil. So it turns out in the modern oil industry began in 1859, and it was just an enormous revolution. Within 5 years, the countryside had gone from dark to light. So it's just this amazing progress. And there's a question of why did it happen in the US? And people think, oh, maybe it was just random. But one interesting thing is one of the early innovators in petroleum was a guy named Abraham Gesner. And he lived in Canada. And in the 1840s, he was innovating processes that later went into oil refining, which is a key innovation to make oil useful. But he tried to start a company in Canada and do refining. It was originally in coal, and he couldn't do it. Why? Because in Canada, the underground was owned by the Crown, and you were not free to exploit it. So even though he knew how to productively transform nature, and he had these ideas that would lead to innovation, he couldn't do anything with them. And then he moved to the US and he could do something with them. And then it contributed to this revolution. So in my mind, this is an example of how human beings, to productively transform our environment and to survive and flourish and to progress, we need to be free to think and free to act and free to evolve. So with that, I'd love your conception of freedom.
And free to move. Free to move. This is what the Canadian man did, okay? That's very important. In fact, I did not know this story, but I will. May I continue a little bit the historical thread? Well, oil.
You're almost the boss on this show. You get quite a bit of discretion.
Yeah, that's right. That is in fact the big idea. The big idea is history is really good for the soul and good for the discussion. Before oil, there had been other revolutions. One was wood, which came after the burning of peat. And then after oil, as you know, oil, of course, with its derivatives, became, let's say, more and more powerful or portable, all the way to diesel fuel, and now methane, natural gas. In this direction, the the fuel has become more concentrated, more powerful, more useful per unit. So the trend that is, of course, in your example, revolutionary, is toward the it's like discovering better and better food, food that's more let's say richer in calories. That's the way it's been with fuel. And it's the natural, and by the way, it's the same in the making of food. Say agriculture. Agriculture became was born 10,000 years ago in a highly dispersed fashion. That was, in fact, the growing of the fuel for people and animals. And then it became better and better and better, meaning harvests bigger and bigger per unit, in the same direction of greater concentration of useful energy per unit over time, per kilogram, okay, over time. So the natural, this is human behavior. People, as I said in the first part, are not stupid. They would like to live more easily. The future is fairly obvious. It is about better and better fuels, not weaker and weaker and more dispersed, more spread out, more difficult to sweep into a small pile kind of fuels. That's the way it's always been. Nobody's gonna go back to what was before domesticated animals. You see, that's the complete story of the more complete image of what you brought up. Living better, more easily, more safely. All this is not only human nature, but animal nature. Animal nature is about constant improvement. By the way, I go back to the River Basin. It is constantly improving itself. Engineers, of course, really want to learn how to do better engineering. Are well advised to look at movies of how nature improves itself every minute of the day. I mean, to flow, to move, to get out of the way of obstacles, or to remove obstacles. That's basic.
So I want to talk about the river basin. I think it's a good segue into freedom. So one of the really interesting things about your work is you point out these very common dynamics among seemingly disparate and even unrelated fields. And so with human action, if you talk about flow, I think of, okay, well, the human is trying to survive. It's, Aristotle would call it like teleological. But how does the river flow relate to that? Because the water itself doesn't have a goal in the way that a human does. And yet there is something similar about it.
As I said last time, who is to know about what, who knows what, or that's a human way of, let's say, personalizing objects that, in this case, are not animate. You asked me how I came to think about this. Well, I had advantages that were in fact enormous, because I grew up with enormous lack of advantage. All right, the society, I'm talking about the early 50s in Eastern Europe, was backward by today's Western European standards. There were almost no cars. The taxis in my city were these famous, you see them in the movies, buggies drawn by horses, with a black canopy. They were interesting, but that was the norm. The street was full of horse droppings and so on. And yes, most of the country was a peasant society. So that was in the 50s. Things slowly became, let's say, more mechanized. The Soviet occupation did not do anything to accelerate that transformation. But in any case, I saw change, Alex. I saw change happening as I was growing up. Now that's one thing. The second advantage is that my father was a very gifted veterinarian, and he took me along with him in his work. He was veterinarians, by the way, historically, they're not about pets, cats and dogs and gerbils. These people are working with farm animals. In fact, veterinus in Latin means beast of burden, the ox and the horse. That for them, the veterinarian medicine was invented in France. So that was my father's work. And I accompanied him. Of course, I was carrying his bag. I was cleaning after the surgery he was doing there somewhere behind the hut. The point is that I saw animal design. I saw the flow, the blood, of course, but I saw the things that were not known, where you could not have a feel for them if you just looked at drawings in the zoology book. And so that was a second advantage.
So what do you mean the flow? Like what flows within the animal are you talking about?
I'm talking about everything from the blood to the piss. It was all about flow. Of course, the movement was obvious. The fact that if the animal was dead, it was not moving at all. That was the obvious thing. The obvious difference between life and death, or alive and dead, was movement. No question about it. So movement came with, in this case, with the veterinary work, with the yes, blood flowing and animal screams, because there was no anesthesia in those days. So and of course I saw death, during these events. So that was an advantage. I was a kid. This was a different kind of schooling compared with what everybody was getting in school. And the third advantage was that one of the, let's say, most popular pastimes where I grew up on the Danube in the Delta was to go fishing. And so from spring to spring, the river was in a different place. It had moved. Imagine. Well, first it was a surprise, but then it was no longer a surprise, because I started to plan on not sitting on that piece of wet dirt, the river bank, that might disappear from under me, you see, which was contrary to the kind of work I was doing in school. In school, they were teaching you to draw the map of the course of the big river Danube, which historically is just one drawing. Well, it may be historically one drawing, but from year to year, it's slightly different, slightly better, of course, because when a tree log falls across a branch, the whole river basin is getting rid of that tree log. The whole river basin, it's marshaling its waters to exhale its water. That's the way. That's in fact the big picture of what the river life really is. And so I had from year to year, I remember, paying attention to these things and marveling at the fact that, first of all, the river is not something to mess around with, because it's not only powerful, but has a mind of its own. And then, now, of course, looking back, it was really very useful to get this idea, because it leads to the bigger conclusion, and which is, of course, that if you try to oppose nature, you are destined to lose.
Let's talk about freedom explicitly. So I mentioned part of my conception of freedom, and in the human realm, and the specific example in energy. How do you think of freedom? What is it, and how broadly does it apply in nature?
Well, in this, freedom, first of all, in fact, all of us who went to school know that in academia, unlike in politics, in academia, people don't talk about freedom. It's not a concept in physics. It's not discussed. Okay, and I, uh, I had the audacity to promote the F word because because of the constructal law. The constructal law states that any flow system, in order to persist in time, must evolve with freedom toward offering greater access to what flows. And that was an idea from 20 years ago. During this time, many people, in fact, asked me, "What do you mean by this? What do you mean? What do you mean by access? What do you mean by evolve or freedom, for that matter?" And it occurred to me that the reason the audience was, let's say, not familiar with the words of the constructal law was because of the word freedom. So, what is freedom? Freedom is simply, very simply, the property or the ability of an object to change. To change. Freedom, without the freedom to change a dimension or the shape of a boundary, there is no change. So in order to have change, you have to have freedom. I was trained in graphic arts growing up. You want to make a better drawing, you have to grab a better pencil or a better brush and paint. You see, that's change. That's freedom. And so, if freedom is the ability of the object to change, then clearly change after change is, of course, the definition of evolution. And evolution itself is happening because of this freedom as a physical property of the object. So, and by the way, of course, toward greater access or to flow more easily means to make changes after change, to make more changes that liberate the flow. And that's how freedom is, in fact, where the magnification of freedom through this kind of thinking becomes synonymous with the direction of evolution and also the definition of access. Access, incident. Let me bring you back to the river access. Let's say you would like to get to the other side of the river. You have the urge to have access to the other side. In you is not a plan or a design to go to a particular spot on the other side, or to go maybe steal a boat and to row across the river, or to go and learn how to swim so you could go to swim across the river. Your objective, if you're running away from enemies, is to get to the other side, to safety. And in so doing, yeah, you cross the river, but where you end up across the river is not the point. The point is that you had access to a territory to which previously you did not have access. And the reason you got there is because you had freedom to what? To jump in the water, to swim properly, or jump in your boat and to row across the river. All these things are changes in your own movement on the map at that particular time. Had you been, let's say, handcuffed or tied to a tree, you would not have had the freedom to get to the other side. You see, that's now the answer with a metaphor, if you want. But
well, so that let's take that example. So, and it applies the same as the energy example. That is, okay, when you're free to act, including to move, you can do this innovation with oil, or you can get to the other side of this river, versus if you're constrained or restrained, you can't. Like if you're handcuffed, then you don't have the freedom. And so you can't flow and you can't access what you're trying to access. What's an example? So with human action, it's very easy to think of lack of freedom. But how does what's an example of lack of freedom in nature where it constrains the progress or evolution of something in nature?
Well, that's a challenging proposition because, as I was saying, nature is full of freedom because, in fact, freedom is nature itself. If well, you saw this with the Mississippi during right before the Katrina hurricane. If the natural design, meaning the Mississippi River Basin, is pinched at the exit with those levees at New Orleans, then the river knows what to do, which is to get those levees out of the way. That's so the tendency, if you can count on it, you can bet on it, is for the flow system to liberate itself, and it does that all the time. It happened in the water ducts under the city of Chicago at about the same time. The flowing water found that the ducts had not been maintained properly, and it destroyed them. And that,
Okay, but if they had been maintained properly, its freedom would have been restricted in that aspect.
as long
right?
as people like you and Adrian continue to pay money called taxes to maintain the unnatural design, yes. But that's very different. By the same token, the piping under my house is not changing at all because it is new. But if it falls into let's say neglect, then the pipes will burst. Of course, the house will crumble, and soon enough, the landscape will be the way it was, 10,000 years ago. They do not confuse the let's call artificial act of the Homo sapiens with for that particular instance in time with the behavior of nature. The individual is part of nature and doing its best to live more easily on that particular spot at that time, and to install rigid pipes is part of that design that empowers the individual, meaning the one who's doing the moving, to move more easily. In other words, the answer to the question of what is flowing in my home is not the water under the house in those pipes. It is Adrian who's flowing. Everything in that home is about my flow, myself. I flow like an iPhone. Okay, how is that for a new?
I love I love that. But you're flowing. I mean, in part by.
I admit it's all about me. Okay, so these artifacts, my rigid pen here is not morphing. Well, that's fine because I'm the one. My morphing benefits the most from the fact that I have the freedom to move this pen on the paper and all these other things. And for that matter, it has to be stiff, so it doesn't bend under the force of my hand. So I agree with the way you began to question. When you bring the individual in the discussion, the audience, yes, naturally is somewhere between perplexed and confused because we think all the time about ourselves and but not about the big picture, which is why are we moving in this niche of ours? Well, we're moving because just like the rest of the niche, we have this natural tendency to get better along the way as we move, to live more easily, whatever, longer. All these things that have to do with animal design, animal tendencies or instincts. How is that? But it's not only is about the animate. The inanimate have the same tendency. The mindless, if you want, for example, the morphing of the the traffic pattern in the city, which is a morphing design that you cannot assign to a particular human being with a particular mind or brain. The society in this big city of ours is nameless. The people who make these decisions are very many. Quite often the decisions are contradictory, but from a decade to decade, a very simple pattern emerges, one that decade after decade is pleasing everybody, or is keeping everybody quiet and
so what's that pattern?
The what?
You said the pattern is emerging that's pleasing everyone. What's the pattern?
The pattern is the traffic pattern. The pattern in the city is not the grid of those streets. It is what flows through them. For example, if there's a public demonstration in the center of town, the people, including the vehicles that converge upon the meeting place, are flowing there the way that the river basin flows to its mouth. It's the flow of any flow in the city is tree-shaped. It is arborescent. Now, when the demonstration is over, that crowd is dispersing itself in the opposite direction. It flows from that point to the whole area, to the suburbs where the people came from. That flow is akin to the flow of water in the river delta, except that in the city, this is a river delta that's usually shaped as a pizza. So you have many points of attraction in a city. You could, a theater performance or a football game, and then there's attraction before the event takes place. There's dispersion at the end of the event. And so the city, if someone were to put colored light bulbs on the top of the heads of these people who move through the city, or on the tops of the cars, the people from say high above would see lights that converge upon a point, and then like the tides, go back to where they came from, meaning River Basin, then the River Delta. A pair of these inhaling, exhaling flows for every point of attraction on the city floor. And so these are complicated flows, the trees, but how do you accommodate their enormous number or enormous complexity with one solid infrastructure called paved streets? Well, with a grid, because through the grid, things can flow this way. The grid has the ability to facilitate tree-like flow, no matter what the point of attraction might be. So that's the answer to your question about the pattern that emerges naturally. And you cannot say that this particular city here was built by Mr. Johnson, you see. No way. It may have been built by a farmer early on, with one house or two houses on one street in the countryside, but that was is not part of this particular picture anymore.
So let's so if we're talking about this tree-like pattern, I think that's a good connection to one of the dynamics you talk about in Freedom and Evolution, which is economies of scale. And so often we think about economies of scale just in terms of economics. When people are free to produce and trade, they tend to gather together and join their productive forces versus just being individual producers. But this is a dynamic you say applies throughout all of nature. Is that right?
Right. And thank you for that suggestion. I would like to talk about economies of scale because this book about freedom is physics, and it's a story told in very simple examples of physics, but examples of early high school physics. Here's economies of scale. you can play with water, right? The water that flows through two identical pipes in parallel flows with a greater difficulty than the same water stream flowing through a bigger pipe, the volume of which is the same as the sum of the two previous volumes. So coming together, meaning the two previous pipes coming together into a single pipe that's bigger, is liberates the flow. This, by the way, this is one reason why in River Basin design, the mother, sorry, not in, anyway, the point is that from 2 to 1, you see this pairing going on in all over the place in nature. So the constructal law, this tendency for things to flow more easily would suggest, or would predict, in fact, that the drawing, this thing that I was exhibiting with my fingers, would change from 2 to 1 that's bigger. Is the same example in pulled inside out like a glove. If you have, let's say on a river, you have 2 barges, each being pulled by a tugboat, and the barges are loaded with something heavy, such as coal, meaning they are mainly submerged. Well, the tugboats are consuming power or fuel coming from you. Well, if you compare that design with a bigger barge, the size of which is the sum of the 2 previous sizes, then the power required by the new tugboat will be smaller than the total power required by the 2 previous tugboats. So once again, moving together is easier, okay, more economical, or more facile than moving individually. We know this as human beings, of course, that in fact this is the mother of social organization, that living alone is really, really tough. So family comes from this idea of, or the clan at a larger scale, all the way to the hut, and then the tribe. All the forms of social organization had been exhibit after exhibit in support of this idea that going alone through the jungle is very, very difficult and dangerous as well. But going together with somebody or with a group is easier, because obviously those in front of you are the ones creating the path, then easier than being alone. So that's the first part of economies of scale. Alone is, let's say, not economical. Together, it's easier for every individual that joins the group. If that's the case, then why hasn't everything in nature become big? Why are there so many scales? Some intermediate size, some, in fact, very many small size. River channels are very good examples of these. And the reason is that on Earth, the movement is not between 2 points, like in elementary geometry. From A to B, the easiest way to go is along a straight line. That's Euclid. Well, no. On an area, like in the example with the city just 5 minutes ago, the flow is between 1 point and a whole area. The whole area is an infinity of points. So if it were a design where only big things would move, let's say big channels streaming away from this point that acts as source, then those big, let's call them fingers or legs, would leave big areas between them, big armpits. Well, the big armpit is a virgin area waiting to be, or ready to be swept by its own big channels, except that the area now is a fraction, like a slice of the pizza, a fraction of what it used to be. So its next big channels will be, yes, smaller than the first big channels that gave birth to that pizza slice. And in this direction of armpits after armpits, all in the direction of smaller and smaller, the most economical channels, going back to my two water pipes, become compared with their preceding channels, smaller and smaller. So hierarchy is the name for what emerges from my examples of that began with the fact that the flowing alone is not as easy as flowing together with someone just like you. So hierarchy is physics. It comes
Okay, let me ask about an example that you use in the book that I found very interesting, which relates to you. And it was the major research universities, beginning with Harvard. And you, in some way, this is analogous to like the big river that's flowing, and then it flows into these smaller streams. So can you explain that? Because I found that just very intriguing, and how it's still true that the center of the university world, or much of it, is in the Northeast United States, after all of these centuries.
exactly, and it's of course destined to remain there, not only in the Northeast, but at the top of the heap. Okay, in terms of rankings. And I'm laughing because here I am, I'm an MIT man, heaping praise on Harvard. It's a little bit like.
Well, and you're also in, Duke. Sometimes people like to call it the Harvard of the South.
No.
There's the best. There's a shirt that says, Harvard, the Duke of the North.
No. Here we have Duke versus North Carolina in Chapel Hill. That's the Harvard phenomenon is once again physics. Harvard, because it had something totally new to offer. Obviously, it was an import from Europe. This idea of university from England, that was an attraction. The educated young men in those days were attracted to Harvard, and so it was a flow, just like the crowd in the city streaming toward let's say the church in the center of town, a tree-shaped flow from the landscape to Harvard. And that was the inhaling. The exhaling was that in the other direction, year after year, educated individuals streamed away to the landscape from which they came. And those became teachers. They became educators themselves. And just like the seeds blown by the wind from a tree after flowering, well, those seeds grew into their own Harvards, say 50 years later. The first was Yale. Yale had essentially the same history, the same mission, the same flow to it and away from it. And then 50 years later, we had almost like an explosion, like a flower blooming, Penn, Princeton, and Columbia, and Delaware. This happened coincidentally along a straight line on the map from the Boston area to this, it's called tri-state, I think. The point is, it was amazing. 50 years after 50 years after 50 years. And this sort of let's call it wildfire, continued to spread. It spread not only in the southern direction to places such as Chapel Hill, more recently Duke, but also all the way to Florida, clearly. But also spread where it came from, meaning in the Boston area. MIT is one example, but this is just recent history. What spread was, in fact, not only the movement of people into the spot and away from the spot, in fact, now all the way around the globe, but what spread was the ability of these educated individuals to to set themselves and their compatriots in motion more easily, more economically, stronger, faster, and more permanently. That's where your oil generation and use example comes in. The stuff that people got by going to Harvard and MIT was this: how to be a more knowledgeable, yes, of course, but the more powerful, more confident, more helpful individual, either with technology or with medicine or with all these wonderful things that people acquire in the amazing higher education system that we have.
So why all these, it seems very curious that hundreds of years later, these old schools like Harvard and Yale they're still just so dominant. Like what you would think, particularly with the internet, it would just be much more dispersed. And those, I certainly believe those aren't the nicest areas. That's why I fled the East Coast myself. So why is it that there's still so much flowing through those places in that little area that has many things to not recommend it?
Because the simple way of spelling evolution in nature is, quote, what works is kept, unquote. So what works is kept. The new idea gets built on top of the one that works. That's why rankings do not change. Harvard obviously itself got better and better and better. It's not necessarily bigger and bigger and bigger, but better and better along the way. Fame is compounded by during this process of getting better. Fame is what attracts students to Harvard. The fame of the professors, but also the fame of the ideas that had come out of Harvard, say 1 or 2 centuries previously. Fame. So fame is something you cannot erase from the map. It is the same for the same reason why Duke, as a basketball team, continues to be highly ranked, because of fame. This is what attracts the best players from high school. Fame. They want to become not only great players, but obviously better living human beings after they retire through, in this case, through the talent called basketball. Same with MIT. MIT is doing with science and technology what Harvard has done with all the let's say departments of higher education in history. Fame, or excellent examples are the great football teams. I'm talking about soccer in Europe. The most famous clubs continue to be famous. They win more than other clubs, but the players, the young players, want to go and play for Arsenal, even though today Arsenal is not playing that well. But it's fame is the they call it brand these days, is what's impossible to erase from the landscape. What works is kept.
So are all of these, I mean, are all of these just different kinds of flow dynamics? Like Harvard, it has a certain, like it makes it easier, you know, it's the first major university, I guess, let's say it is. And then that makes it easier for certain types of people to flow or to achieve their goals. And then that leads to advancements that makes it even easier for others to achieve their goals. Or the Duke basketball team, if you think about, if you want to flow toward being a successful basketball player, you can join Coach K at Duke, or you could go to some team that barely made the NIT last year. And the second path has a lot more friction to it, right? It's much harder to move successfully. And so more people go to the path of least resistance, and that makes an even more attractive path for more people. Is that what's going on?
The second path with the NIT is a path into oblivion, because it's not about just playing in college. It's about what you do in your life, and you get noticed on television or word of mouth, doesn't matter. You get noticed if you happen to be on the roster of a team like Duke. You get noticed. It's about the answer to the question of to what family do you belong? What is the name of your family? It's that it's an advantage. It's an advantage to be associated with a group that's been known as a group of excellence, not only on the map but in the history of that place. So that's the way society, of course, it's organized, but it's marbleized in these. Go back to the city example. Pizzas or flows to the point and away from the point, all superimposed on each other, that people call them complexity and randomness and diversity and all sorts of defeatist words that in fact come from what I just explained. But may I tell you a little joke that just popped in my head now that
okay.
Yeah, look, so what works is kept, okay? Here's an early example that I just thought of. So in the 50s, yes, which was, again, the Soviet occupation of my provincial town where I grew up. So they were teaching, obviously, communism all the time in school. And one day I came home, and my parents, of course, were very, very critical of what was going on. Says, so what do they teach you today? And I pulled a piece of paper, and they said, well, today they taught us the 10 lines or laws of the Soviet morale. Soviet morale. Yeah. And my father cracked up. Said, these are the 10 commandments. These are the 10 commandments. They just replaced the name of God with Soviet. So you see, what works is kept. The designers of this indoctrination package could not come up with something different or better. But this happens. It happens. Quietly everywhere you look. What works is kept.
So let's talk about this idea. So freedom, one of the big points I take away is that freedom, in part because of these economies of scale, leads to hierarchy. We're not talking about coerced hierarchy, just when people are free, these different kinds of hierarchies form. And one that you talk about that I think is particularly important is that when people are free, fuel consumption is hierarchical. So can you talk about that?
Sure. Yeah. First of all, hierarchy happens naturally because it comes from the urge of every individual to move more easily. Every individual in this organization moves more, is aided in life by the hierarchical design, as opposed to one size fits all, where every single one on his own in the thicket. No. So hierarchy is good for those who belong to the hierarchy. All right. That happens naturally because in other words, people join freely. People are joining because they're egotistical. You see, they join because it's good for them. That's the mother or the origin of hierarchy. And but of course, the movement doesn't happen by itself. Movement, again, you can think about the individuals in the city, is happening because fuel is being burned in the engine of the car, or the food in your belly. So more movement requires more fuel, and that's why in a picture of how the fuel is consumed on the same area, you'll see a hierarchy of fuel consumption. The few big movers are consuming more fuel, meaning per individual, more fuel than the many small movers. Now, I go back to the way I started. If you are to calculate the total rate of fuel consumption on this hierarchically designed area, you'll discover it is a lot smaller than in the other limit, where every individual is, moving with, driven by his or her own little engine, moving obviously all over the place. So the hierarchy is what enables the group to have life on that area. The comparison is obvious, and that's why the hierarchy happens naturally. So hierarchical movement means hierarchical consumption of fuel. And just since you started the conversation, economists have shown us, this is now empiricism or the facts, as I gesticulated in part one of this conversation with you, economists have shown us that the annual consumption of fuel is proportional in a one-to-one relationship with the annual wealth called the gross domestic product. So wealth is the economist's name for the rate of fuel consumption, broadly speaking. The wealthy country or city or university or individual moves more, easy to see, from big cars to jet setters, moves more than those who are not as wealthy. The wealthy are few, the not so wealthy are many. And so the non-uniform distribution of wealth is, of course, hierarchical. And that too is another name for the hierarchical consumption of fuel. And that too is another name for the hierarchical distribution of movement on the area. But it all comes from the natural occurrence of the hierarchical movement, because that is the easiest way for the whole populated area to move.
So then how does this connect to progress? Because you look at, say, China and India, but particularly China in the last several decades, and their amount of fuel consumption has massively increased. Their standard of living has increased. Their life expectancy has increased. How does your view explain these improvements around the world, and what does it project for the future in terms of the wealth of people and the energy use of people 50 years from now?
First of all, China versus India, these are two different designs. India is a democracy, China is not. Let's call it planned modernization of China is to be compared with what happened in the Soviet Union in the 30s, and then again in the late 40s and then the 50s. There was planned expansion of the economy, meaning building, of course, industrialization, And these acts in China, very famous with the Great Leap Forward, are destined to be short-lived. One cannot cover these armpits, the ones with basically historic lack of movement, but with historic poverty. You cannot cover all these armpits with big projects streaming from the top. In China, you have the facade, which is their east coast, that tourists and television marvel at. But the country is, let's say, wealth in China is famously non-uniformly distributed, meaning the distribution of wealth in China goes downhill as you go away from the advanced East Coast. But the point is that the so-called planned economy, which is of course by definition rigid in comparison with the one that's morphing all the time, because people contradict other people all the time, but vote, and that's what's going on in India by comparison. That sort of planned economy, history has shown, is all the way to Cuba and other places that is not short-lived, and then many, including communist countries, have been getting other ideas, ideas of liberating the flow. It happened, by the way, in Eastern Europe 2 decades before the fall of the Iron Curtain. Countries such as Hungary and Poland had little by little, let's say, quietly gotten this. Sorry, governments, not countries. Gotten this idea that liberating the economy and the decision making, all the way to education and things, was better for the future.
So if we just take India, what would you, so that's a place that right now per capita uses a small fraction of what we use in the United States, but there's a decent amount of freedom there. What do you expect? Is it inevitable? I mean, because I think people might take what you said earlier and think, oh, it's inevitable that they'll just be poor forever. If you're saying there's these hierarchies,
these places, China and these are big places, big groups. China, there are actually 3 big groups. Okay, China, India, and all of Africa. They have they're compared with the West, like the landscape. Close or far relative to Harvard in our previous discussion of the 400 years of higher education in the U.S. It takes time for the design to spread, or for that matter, takes time for those who are educated, say in the West, to go back to these places and build it. So it takes time, but the future is already what the world has seen. Science, as we practice it, is a Western construct. I open my book, every book you want, thermodynamics or calculus. It's from the advanced West. This is long before people took this. Burning candle across the Atlantic. So it spread because it's good. And these other things that are good may be coming, in fact, from India and China. But the point, all these things that are good and are spreading, they'll keep on spreading, but that takes time. Another great example, by the way, is soccer. It has spread. It's a not only liberating but unifying activity. It's a peace building. It's really it promotes peace. Same with the Olympic movement, an idea from from a Frenchman. You know, it spread because it is good, and it continues to not just spread, but to become more influential or more permanent, and that's good. And then, of course, I can go back to the Ten Commandments. What good is kept. So this will take time, but along the way, these flowing, river basins of humanity will have no choice but to push the logs out of the way, the obstacles. This is how democracy were human rights and these things have come to be. They are good and they're here to stay. Those who oppose them are destined to be contradicted by future events.
Well, I want to make sure we cover, we're not going to be able to cover everything I want to cover, but I want to make sure to cover, your views on the moral case for fossil fuels, since you wrote me some interesting notes about that. And that certainly fits in with, obviously that's my view, but I'm curious on what you have to say about that.
Well, it's not what I have to say. I think that the nature is on your side of the argument. Fuels, consumption of fuels, in this case, fossil fuel, is as natural as people adopting fire or people domesticating animals, step by step. People, before domesticated animals, people acquiring boating, which is a way to move on the world map a lot more easily than basically pushing the bushes out of your path. Think about it. So the big picture is one of big step after big step toward easier movement. And this thing with burning oil, by the way, wasn't back then. There were no cars. It was about extending the duration of daylight. It was very good for all sorts of things. Not to go to sleep with the chickens. It was good for obviously for life, for extending labor per day, which meant productivity, which meant, of course, wealth eventually. Much safer to live with light in the home than otherwise, warmer, of course. And and of course, that helped the spreading of literacy. I mean, the list is long, but the list is complicated because one good thing helped the other n-1 good things. And so along the way, yes, people did the better things with the oil. They fractioned it. They developed all sorts of things. By the way, the drilling for oil spread like wildfire on the globe, just like the railroads, by the way, before that. And all that is kind of, well, frankly, history, but it's an interesting history. It wasn't just the oil. Then with the spreading of steam power plants, came the spreading of the distribution of that power, meaning the distribution of electric power. So the landscape got wired. The world became electrified. There were no satellites back then to see how bright the Earth had become. Japan in the 20s was the first to be electrified completely. Now you get the idea as to why Japan then had the ambitions of dominating the world shortly after that. This phenomenon that you bring up with the oil man from Canada is a very, very good story. One that's so clear that if you know it, then you know how to predict the future of the same story. And the future is toward toward the obviously better fuels, meaning more potent. You have to be careful there, because the potent could also explode in your face. So every new technology has an attractive face and also a repulsive back. So you have to be. It's always been this way with novelty in the world. But because people are not stupid, the world goes forward with what I said earlier, which is what good is kept, and that's that will be the future of power. Power is as that quote from Matthew Bolton. Matthew Bolton. He was the partner of James Watt. Matthew Bolton was a lawyer, and he was the manager of the works that made these steam engines. He was the genius behind the spreading of that technology. He came up with this idea that I'll give you the engine for free if you pay me in return the savings that you, or a fraction of the savings that you registered by using my engine as opposed to the previous one that you're using. Because you see, the James Watt engine was revolutionary in terms of efficiency in those days. And so it was a little bit like, I give you, say, the iPhone for free, and you pay me back a fraction of how much happier you are today that you have my iPhone. That was Matthew Bolton. He's the one with that line, sir, I sell here, sir, what the whole world wants. And the capital letters were his.
Oh, they were, okay.
They were his. They were his. Yeah.
Yeah, I use that one, I think, in the intro to the last episode.
Yeah. By the way, Alex, the word power is powerful. It sounds like an explosion. People should pronounce it not only often but loudly. And it means this. It means power, of course, is force times speed, but it means pushing something a lot more or more effectively, and all these other good things, faster, of course, a heavier thing being pushed faster. Well, you get the idea. You get the idea of what all of us want, and we want it so universally that we don't have to argue or to apologize for the fact that we need this. We need the car. We need the food on a table. We need the electricity in the house, the light, the everything at the fingertips. Gadgets galore. These things are not in order to show off. They are necessary. And tomorrow, what was necessary yesterday is not good enough. It has to be improved or replaced by something that's even more empowering. That's another key word that comes from the mental viewing of what power really represents. And power means the ability to move, and that's how it becomes. Power is the baby of freedom to evolve, because again, without change, there's nothing new.
Okay, final thing I want to bring up. I have more things, but they'll have to wait till another time. But I want to challenge one thing partially. So if we talk about the future of energy, and there's this general trend toward forms of energy that are more cost effective, and they tend to be denser rather than dilute, and they tend to be stored versus these intermittent flows. I think the logical way you'd expect energy to evolve would be toward nuclear, since it's so dense. You're releasing just this incredibly dense store of energy. And yet what we've seen is that we saw some progression there, particularly in the 1970s, but then we saw an ideological movement that really demonized nuclear and almost criminalized it, to the point where it's very hard. There's very little freedom in nuclear to build and to innovate. It takes 14 years to build a plant, whereas a couple decades ago, it took 4 years. There's very little evolution. And so what this shows to me is that bad philosophy can at least temporarily restrict freedom and restrict progress and prevent people from flowing or succeeding in the way they otherwise would. And so that's part of why I'm motivated to talk about the things I talk about, is because I don't think it's inevitable that people will have freedom, at least in the short term, because they can accept ideas that make them restrict freedom, and that can slow down progress hugely. So I'm curious how you think about that in terms of the physics of all of this.
Okay, that's correct. Your grasp of history is accurate. I was in school at a time when the nuclear reactor technology was a la mode at MIT. They still have a nuclear engineering department today because it's an important technology to possess and to have. And now when pinned against the wall, the society will reach for whatever weapon is available to defend itself against, in this case, the threat of no movement. So in that extreme, the challenge society will use what it has. In this case, nuclear power. But right now, the evidence, in fact, surprisingly to even to someone like me, is that human ingenuity has been so, let's say, life-saving that society is nowhere near of being pinned against the wall. You have not only fuel discovery, as if exploration is a bottomless pit. There's fuel found here, over there, of many kinds. Countries that were not into producing oil have become famous and rich oil producers. Under the sea and all these things that you know about. And so the scenario that you're trying to respond to is, you can argue about it and it may happen, but the solution will always be what we have seen, which is that people will come up with new solutions. And that is a movie to be watched by those who live long enough to participate in it. But I'll give you an example from recent history. Say the Eastern campaign of Nazi Germany. It ran on oil. Which of course, a lot of it was from Romania. And then Hitler went for oil fields on the Caspian Sea and failed. And so that is an example of a society, pinned against the wall, pinned by its own military technology. So they appealed to its scientists and came up with synthetic gasoline, which is a technology that relies on another kind of fuel, not on oil. The point is that that is an example of what a group does if really, really threatened with its extinction, you see. That's there are many examples of this kind especially in the military, in the history of military technology. So I'm not pessimistic about these things at all. So I'm not going to predict what's going to happen to nuclear. It will be part of technological era, I would say, long term. But I want to come back to a point that I made predictively last time in the first part. The movement that is driven by the consumption of fuel, as I said in part one, is responsible for the not only the growth in the movement, but also population growth and all of that. And also it comes with the slowing down of the so-called expansion, because the technology of moving people on the planet is in fact one. It is the power from fire. And so that is the reason why your fossil fuels are primordial in this particular scenario. They are different than what was before. And right now, you can throw in the nuclear fuel there. That right now, that's what it is. There's nothing on a landscape that's likely to set the humanity in motion the way that, say, 20 years ago, steam power set humanity in motion. And that's why the society, filling its smaller and smaller gaps or armpits with movement, is reaching, kind of hitting a ceiling, or reaching really the so-called boundary of diminishing returns. Incidentally, this is diminishing returns, that the movement on the planet today is a 200 years old technology. And the technology is creating a better and better movement in smaller and smaller steps, tinier and tinier steps. Everybody is moving more. Yeah, everybody is getting, wealthier. The rich and the not so rich, but in time, everybody is moving more in smaller and smaller steps. If somebody comes up with I don't know what futuristic way of moving Adrian effortlessly to Tokyo, Japan tomorrow, then and that means everybody will have access to this way of invading the world 10 times over. Then that will be another discussion to have. But I don't see that sort of revolution happening here. It is from this that the notion of extraterrestrial expansion of people is flourishing, not only as a fantasy, but as a a practical hands-on project. So more space requires greater power, and bigger and bigger visionaries. It's always been this way, meaning one Christopher Columbus at a time.
Well, so we got to wrap up. I would just say that the more people value freedom, the faster that's going to happen, and the better the flow will be around the world. So I want to thank you for these discussions. In the future, I hope we can do one on intellectual and scientific and academic freedom, which I have a lot to ask you about, but so hopefully we can do that some other time. But as we close, just tell listeners where they can learn more about you and your work, just so that they can follow up.
Well, these days it's easy to to Google anybody. Number one, I have my work is uh, was not born yesterday. Unfortunately, I've done a lot of thermodynamics before coming up with design in nature, and that's these are popular books I wrote: Design in Nature, The Physics of Life, and only now, most recently, Freedom and Evolution. These are the titles to read. They are short and they summarize. They're in fact a trilogy, a story of my own evolution in the direction of discussing with the general public topics that are easy to defend, say scientifically, but the topics that are a lot more familiar, I found out, a lot more familiar to the general public if you present them in a common language, in stories about growing up, or historical conflict, or historical progress, for that matter. And so the answer to your question is yes, read the Design in Nature, The Physics of Life, and Freedom and Evolution, or simply look for my name on the web, or on the website of Duke University, which, by the way, is a great university because compared with others, it still leads in the Department of Freedom. It lets people by themselves to be creative.
Yeah, I ran up against the administration many times when I was at Duke, but I was much better. I was glad I was there versus a lot of other places.
That's the way. That means you've been growing older and wiser. That's the way it is. Yes. When you're young, you tend to well, there's a revolutionary in every young person, but with age, you discover that that the home in which you grew up was in fact a very good home, and what works is kept. That's the important thing.
All right. Well, Professor Bejan, thanks so much for taking the time, and I look forward to staying in touch with you and exchanging ideas for years to come.
Thank you. Thank you, and thank your audience. Thank you.
Thanks again to Professor Bejan for joining me on this episode and on the last episode. I want to make one final point about the issue I raised at the end about how bad ideas, bad philosophy can inhibit freedom and inhibit progress. One point Professor Bejan made was about, human beings, when their backs are against the wall, they will find something that works. And I think that's true. It's definitely true to a certain point, but I think something is definitely lost there, because human beings are individuals. And when we talk about human beings with their backs against the wall, so if we just talk about billions of poor people around the world who don't have much energy and very related, don't have much freedom, sure, at some point, that's going to improve. And if there's and movements to thwart that will at some point be overcome. But in the meantime, it's possible for there just to be mass devastation that costs many people their lives, that makes many people's lives worse. So this can be true in the poorer parts of the world. And in the wealthier parts of the world, they can degenerate. So you look at Venezuela, which was one of the wealthier Latin American countries, and now it's in terrible shape. So at some point, our force is going to push in the opposite direction, probably, but the ideas can hold it back. Or the example I mentioned of nuclear, I believe, could be benefiting many, many lives. I mean, billions of lives by now, and it's restricted in all sorts of ways. And I've been looking at it recently, just the technical details of it in the US, and it is just obscene how much our electricity grid discriminates against reliable energy, underpays reliable energy, overpays for unreliable energy that in many contexts is completely useless. I've been studying the grid and in Arizona in particular, and you look at the state of things there, and it's so rigged that their policies are leading them in the direction of shutting down the Palo Verde nuclear plant, which is one of the lowest cost, most reliable power plants, I think, in the world. And so if you want to know more about that, that's somewhat of a digression. Go to the episode Rigged Against Reliables with Tom Stacy. But the broader point here is just that bad ideas have these enormous consequences in terms of inhibiting freedom and inhibiting human flourishing and human progress, which is part of the reason why I'm so focused on changing the underlying ideas about energy that people have, why I'm so focused on looking at the framework that we're using, including what values are we using? What assumptions do we have about the relationship between Earth and human beings? What methods are we using to analyze things? Are we looking at the full context, or are we distorting the context, like I believe many of our leading thinkers do today? So I think it's very important to understand that there is a sense in which human beings will always seek things that work. And those are powerful forces to understand, and they're generally good forces. But the ideas that we have can take those forces and harness them for good, or they can suppress them. And they can also harness them for evil in a sense. But I think the real issue is just suppressing the human being's ability to innovate and create and progress. And that's a lot of what's happening with the ideas today. We have many ideas that are inhibiting human beings' ability to create and innovate and progress. And for more on that, you can see the episode with Jay Storrs Hall, Where's My Flying Car?, which I think is a good companion to this set of episodes. As I said before, I would like to have Professor Bejan on sometime to talk about academic freedom, or more broadly, intellectual freedom, including scientific freedom, since he has a lot of insights about that in his book. He has some controversial views that I would love to get into. But next week, we are going to, and the next couple of weeks, I have some interesting guests, more conventional guests lined up. But I think you're going to learn some fascinating stuff, including from one guest who has really interesting views on just the economics of energy in the future, including international oil markets, which is not something we've talked about a lot. So I am looking forward to ending the year with some really good additional power hours and starting to book the next year as well. If you have any suggestions for guests, or if you have any questions, comments, love mail, or hate mail, you can email me at alex@alexepstein.com. Make sure to get on my mailing list. If you're not there already, you can sign up easily at alexepsteinlist.com. If you want to know some really good talking points about energy, environment, and climate issues, go to energytalkingpoints.com. And if you are an elected official or staff member in the U.S. House, U.S. Senate, or governor's office, you can join my free messaging group called Energy Talking Points on Demand. Just go to energytalkingpointsondemand.com. And of course, any listener, if you know somebody who's qualified for this and may be interested, just tell them to go to energytalkingpointsondemand.com. If you like our work at the Center for Industrial Progress, you can become an accelerator promoting our research and development and our promotional efforts. You can do that at industrialprogress.com/accelerate. All right, that is it for this week. Looking forward to the next interview. Hope you are as well. Until then, I'm Alex Epstein. This has been Power Hour.
Power Hour. Life, liberty, and the pursuit of energy. Power Hour. The antidote to shallow thinking about energy issues.